That seat's not for you." The words hit louder than the boardroom silence. 12 men in suits turned their heads. Some smirked. Others said nothing. But she heard it all. The tone. The intent. The insult dressed as protocol. One sentence, thrown like a dart across polished oak, aimed squarely at her skin. Not her role, not her work, not her numbers. Just her presence. Just the fact that she, a black woman in a tailored navy suit, dared sit at the table like she belonged. No one reached for her. No one stopped it. They just watched as the CEO leaned forward, smiled without warmth, and motioned toward the back of the room like she was a guest who'd wandered too close to the adults. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that she wasn't a visitor. She wasn't here on courtesy. She wasn't just another face at the table. And she had come armed. Not with rage. Not even with revenge. But with the one thing this boardroom feared most: power wrapped in silence. This isn't just a story about one woman being humiliated in public. It's about how she dismantled the very empire that tried to erase her, and how the people who laughed in the beginning weren't laughing when it all came crashing down. So stay locked in. Watch every frame. Because the deeper you go, the louder the truth becomes. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. Which moment leaves you breathless? Hit like, hit subscribe, and let us know. You're not ready for what comes next. At precisely 8:45 a.m., the boardroom of Halbert Equity was already humming with pretense. The skyline stretched across the glass windows behind them, gleaming with the illusion of power. But inside the room, something uglier settled in. The long oval table held 12 executives, all middle-aged, all white, all in tailored suits. At the far end, Amara Lewis sat poised, tablet open, blazer crisp, posture perfect. She was the youngest in the room and the only black woman, by design, not by chance. Today's meeting was supposed to showcase the final investor deck for Halbert's high-profile merger with the Vandergroup, and Amara had spent the last 3 weeks building that strategy from the ground up. She'd written the projections, built the model, negotiated the risk terms. Every slide bore her fingerprints. Or so she thought. When the lights dimmed and the projector blinked on, her chest tightened. The file loaded slowly, and the first slide flashed up with a title: Avanta Acquisition Q4 Alignment Strategy. Below it, in pale blue font, prepared by Caleb Morgan, senior partner. Her name was gone. She leaned forward, blinking hard. She flipped through the first few slides. Her formatting was still there, same headers, same footnotes, same graphic placement. But her name, her annotations, her strategic highlights had all been stripped clean, replaced, whitewashed. She looked across the table toward Richard Grayson, the CEO, who sat reclined at the head of the room like he owned the oxygen. He didn't meet her eyes. "Let's begin," he said, tapping his laptop. "This deck is clean, final, approved. Thanks to Caleb for stepping in and tightening the narrative." Caleb, seated 2 chairs to Richard's left, gave a half smile, clearly surprised but not objecting. Amara opened her mouth. Actually, her voice was calm, controlled. "This version is not the one submitted last night. I uploaded the final approved deck at 11:02 p.m., which included revised risk overlays and capital reallocation." Richard glanced at her, then at his screen. "IT must have pushed the wrong version. We'll deal with that later." He said it like a shrug. Just a harmless mix-up. Amara's jaw flexed. She swiped through the deck on her tablet. Her models had been replaced with Caleb's outdated ones. The market segmentation she ran with actual Avanta data was gone, replaced by boilerplate fluff from last quarter. She raised her hand. "If I may, the updated data is critical, of course," Richard said smoothly, cutting her off. "But we're short on time today. We'll circle back on revisions. Let's keep momentum." He clicked to the next slide, silencing her with a slide transition. She tried again. "I believe this will directly affect projected ROI," but this time her microphone cut out. The room fell silent. Then a low chuckle rippled down the table. Someone muttered, "She's muted." Richard smiled thinly. "Technical issue. But it's fine, Amara. Let's move on. We got the gist." The room laughed again. Her mic didn't come back. Her name wasn't on the deck. Her data had been erased, and now her voice had literally been shut off. Richard continued presenting her work, dressed in someone else's name, using old numbers, and all anyone else did was nod. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't careless. It was methodical, deliberate, executed with the kind of subtlety that left no bruises, but carved the bone. Amara sat back slowly, tablet still open in front of her. Her pulse was calm, not because she wasn't angry, but because she knew exactly what was happening. Richard wasn't just undermining her. He was gaslighting her in real time, in front of 12 witnesses, daring her to push back so they could brand her emotional, difficult, disruptive. She had watched this playbook unfold 100 times. She just didn't expect it to happen so soon or so publicly. She watched Caleb flip through the slides, hesitating when the model numbers didn't make sense because they were outdated, inaccurate. Amara glanced across the table at Lena Rowe, another partner, who refused to meet her eyes. Lena had praised her model 2 nights ago in private. But here, silence. In the corner of the screen, the presenter view timer ticked forward, minute by minute. And with each slide, Richard cemented the lie. She wasn't the lead. She wasn't the mind. She wasn't even there. It came from a burner internal address. No name, no signature. Just a bouncing mail alias routed through a server she recognized as internal use only, restricted to executive access. Curious and cautious, she clicked. What loaded made her jaw tense. It was a screenshot, an internal group chat from Halberd's Partner Banter Slack channel. The meme was front and center, a stock photo of a smiling black woman holding a pie chart, with a caption slapped across it that read, "When the diversity hire starts thinking she's in charge." The background message beneath the image read, "Don't worry, she'll be rotated out before she finishes the second pie." The username was anonymized, but the tone was familiar, mean-spirited, sharp, too clean to be random. Someone had written that with intention. Someone high enough up the chain to feel safe doing it. Amara sat still, letting her eyes move over every pixel of the image. It wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. A message disguised as a joke, dropped in a channel built for casual camaraderie. But jokes, especially anonymous ones in rooms of power, often revealed more than they hid. She didn't respond. She didn't forward it to HR. Not yet. Instead, she archived the email, flagged the IP, and noted the server route. She had tools, friends in cybersecurity, contacts who owed her favors from past negotiations. If they thought hiding behind a digital mask would keep them untouchable, they'd picked the wrong woman. 30 minutes later, still trying to center herself, she stepped into the executive elevator to head to legal for an NDA update on the Avanta transaction. The chrome doors slid shut, and she tapped her badge against the reader. Nothing. A red light flashed. Try again. Still red. The air tightened. The elevator didn't move. She tapped it once more, then again. The interface beeped, then displayed an unfamiliar message. Access denied, clearance restricted. This was her regular access. This was the elevator she'd used every day since being promoted to managing director 6 months ago. Amara stepped back, confused, and pulled her phone to check her access tier. It still showed the same clearance, Executive Level 3. She pressed the call button for building security, waded through the generic prompts, and finally got a human voice. Halberd Security, this is Jim. She kept her voice even. This is Amara Lewis, MD. My elevator access was just denied from the exec shaft. I'd like to know if there's a system issue. There was a pause. Let me check. Silence. Then the sound of typing. Then a longer silence. Ma'am, your access was downgraded this morning to Tier 2. Non-executive level. Downgraded by who? Another pause. I'm seeing a system update pushed by admin override. There's no name. Just time-stamped at 7:16 a.m. Amara looked at her watch. That was 40 minutes before the board meeting. Can you reverse it? She asked. I'll need authorization from HR or your division head. She closed her eyes. Richard. Of course. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an accident. This was coordinated, calculated. If removing her name from the deck was step 1, this was step 2, erase her visibility, restrict her access, squeeze her out without ever filing paperwork. Death by 1,000 slights. By the time she got to the legal office using the general elevator, she was 20 minutes late and the general counsel had left for another call. When she returned to her desk, her Slack notifications had been wiped. Channels she once had full visibility over, M&A watchlist, partner pipeline, investor relations, were now grayed out with the words, "You no longer have access to this workspace." Not revoked, not suspended, no longer, as if she had simply never belonged. Amara sat at her desk, motionless. Around her, the floor buzzed with movement. No one looked at her. No one asked what was wrong. She was invisible, and in this world, invisibility was both a weapon and a verdict. The only sign of acknowledgement came as she reached for her coffee mug. Amara noticed the shift immediately. The smiles became too practiced, the questions too vague, and the small talk too mechanical. Then came Lena Rowe. Lena had always walked the line between ally and opportunist, but now she turned warm, too warm. She began showing up outside Amara's office just before meetings, always with 2 lattes and an offer to split slides or review alignment. At first, Amara appreciated it. After the gaslighting, the meme, the elevator lockout, any form of support felt like oxygen. They'd talk over lunch, exchange notes in meetings, and Lena would listen attentively, even taking handwritten notes as Amara outlined projections, equity controls, and international tax timing, technical, refined work. Amara never suspected a thing. Not until Monday. That morning, Halbert's internal newsletter went out, as it did every week, featuring project spotlights and division recognition. This time, the headline read, "Innovating M&A Lena Rowe's Streamlined Proposal Wins, Praise from Avanta Liaison." Amara blinked. Beneath the headline was a screenshot, one of the proposal visuals she had created from scratch, a layered model showing multi-market absorption broken down by risk quadrant. It was hers, not just the format or idea. Every number, every shape, every line. Word for word. Lena had taken it, put her name on it, and handed it to PR. Amara scrolled further. The write-up quoted Lena, "I believe simplicity is key in high-stakes integration. We stripped out the noise and brought forward what mattered." Amara felt her fingers tighten over her trackpad. She read it again, then checked the date the newsletter had been approved for publishing. It matched the day Lena had taken her notes. The betrayal wasn't just in the theft, it was in the timing. Lena had waited until Amara was distracted by microaggressions, systemic erasure, and humiliation. Then she'd moved in smiling. Amara didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, she printed both versions, the original deck she'd sent to internal review and the newsletter release with Lena's edits. Then she walked down to HR. But when she reached the frosted glass doors of the HR suite, she was intercepted before even sitting. "Ms. Lewis, can we speak in room C?" The voice belonged to Malik Dorset, the company's director of culture and internal wellness. He spoke gently, but with the softness of someone about to deliver an unpleasant truth. Inside the room, a long glass table waited, surrounded by padded chairs no one ever got comfortable in. Malik gestured for her to sit. A third person entered, Janine Moore, the firm's risk counsel. She nodded, but didn't smile. That was never a good sign. Malik folded his hands. "We wanted to check in with you. There's been some concern raised from a few partners." Amara tilted her head. Concern about what? Janine spoke, calm and practiced. Tension. Energy in meetings. A sense that some teams are uncomfortable with the tone of collaboration lately. Amara blinked. "Because my slides were stolen and published under someone else's name?" Neither Malik nor Janine responded directly. Malik cleared his throat. "Look, we know it's been a tense quarter. We're close to a big merger and pressure's mounting. You've always been a strong asset, Amara. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth stepping back from this one." Amara narrowed her eyes. "You're suggesting I recuse myself from the Avanta project?" Janine leaned forward. "Not recuse. Just decompress. Take a breath. Let the team close this one out. We're thinking long-term alignment here. There it was, the company's most poisonous phrase. Long-term alignment. It meant you're rocking the boat. It meant let us steal your work quietly, and we'll circle back when you're useful again. It meant disappear now or make this worse. Amara sat back in her chair, every muscle still. And if I decline that suggestion? Malik hesitated. No one's forcing anything. We're just trying to manage social optics. That phrase cut deeper than any insult. Social optics. Her presence was now a PR risk. Not because of what she did wrong, but because of what she threatened to expose. Amara stood. Thank you for the concern. I'll return to my desk now. She closed the door behind her, checked that the blinds were drawn, and pulled up the internal directory logs on her laptop. She had installed a silent tracker 2 months ago, not for spying, but for protection. When you were one of one, you learned quickly to record everything. She reviewed the activity log. At 9:16 a.m., while she had been in HR, someone had accessed her desktop remotely under admin override. The device ID matched an account assigned to Richard's executive assistant, Jeremy Voss. Amara's heart didn't race. It slowed, controlled. Jeremy didn't have clearance to scan her private folder, but the log showed access. Specifically, her private notes on Avanta's risk tolerance negotiation, her redline draft of the financial structure, and most damningly, her email exchanges with the Avanta CFO, who had privately expressed discomfort with Richard's tone during a previous call. That email was marked confidential, flagged as a potential breach if shared outside counsel. And now it had been opened. She screen captured everything, time-stamped it, encrypted the data, and sent it to her private cloud with restricted access. They weren't just pushing her out, they were preparing to discredit her. She sensed the next step before it arrived. At 4:23 p.m., she received a flagged email from HR, subject, internal conduct notification. The message was brief, cold, and dangerously vague. It stated that the firm had received a credible tip of unprofessional behavior and potential violation of confidentiality protocols. It noted that communication with external parties outside of designated approval processes may constitute a breach of policy, and that a review is underway to determine next steps. Amara's fingers tightened on the mouse. She reread the lines again. Then she checked the CC list. No one else. Private. Targeted. Designed to destabilize. She opened the document history on the files in question and found that none of them had been forwarded externally outside the approved channels. Every email was internal, every exchange logged. The only person who could twist it into misconduct was someone who had accessed her computer without permission, someone who was now planting the idea that she had gone rogue. Her phone buzzed. It was Lena. A text. I didn't know they'd go this far. Please be careful. Amara didn't reply. The performance was exhausting. Everyone wanted to benefit from her intellect, her access, her work, until the moment it challenged the hierarchy. Then suddenly, she was dangerous, problematic, replaceable. She stood, walked to the window, and stared down at the street 23 floors below. The city pulsed beneath her, taxicabs, buses, lives moving with oblivious momentum. She had worked for this view, for the chance to build something from the inside out. And now they were trying to turn that window into a wall. She returned to her desk, opened her secure drive, and accessed the contingency folder she never thought she'd need. Inside were voice recordings from internal calls, timestamps from stolen file accesses, and a detailed breakdown of every modification Lena had made to her original proposal. She didn't have to explain herself. She just had to make sure the truth had witnesses. Before leaving, she ran one last check of her email. There, buried between calendar invites and vendor updates, was another anonymous message. No subject line, just one line of text in the body. You should have stayed in your lane. That wasn't a warning. Inside, the lights were still off, and the windows still reflected the gray dawn. She placed her laptop on the table, booted it up, and waited. Within minutes, the email alert arrived. Subject: Article draft clearance request. Her stomach sank, not out of fear, but recognition. She opened the PDF attachment and immediately saw her name in the headline. Controversial XX college, past raises new ethical questions amid merger. Below, it was an image from her graduation yearbook, cropped without context, accompanied by text that made her fingers freeze over the keyboard. The article alleged that Amara had received her Ivy League scholarship under questionable circumstances, suggesting her recommendation letters were falsified and that her application was flagged internally, but pushed through under donor pressure. It referenced unnamed faculty members and former classmates, none of whom were cited. The sources were anonymous. The narrative was poison, a manufactured scandal, just ambiguous enough to sound plausible, just strategic enough to cast doubt on her integrity. It was designed to go viral. She scanned the author line, a freelancer whose recent work included tabloid-level leaks and whisper campaigns often tied to corporate vendettas. The timestamp on the draft's metadata, 3:16 a.m. The distribution list on the email was internal only, but someone had intentionally looped her in, either as a threat or as an insurance policy. Either way, it confirmed what she had suspected. Richard was moving the campaign public. The internal attempts to discredit her hadn't broken her, so now he was building a public record, a shadow that would follow her even if she left Halberd behind. A few minutes later, her office phone rang. It was Donna from legal. "Amara," she said with a stiffness that couldn't hide its reluctance. "We need to meet with you on a governance matter. Room B2, in 10. Amara didn't ask why. She knew. 10 minutes later, she sat across from Donna and a member of HR compliance named Russ. A manila folder lay closed on the table between them. Russ spoke first. "Given the volatility around the merger and the recent media signals, we're proposing a structural change in oversight." He used the word proposing, but his tone left little doubt it was a directive. Donna slid the folder toward her. "This is a voluntary reclassification agreement. If signed, it would transfer your strategic authority on the Avanta merger to a temporary neutral representative until the transaction closes, just to avoid any appearance of bias or undue pressure." Amara opened the folder. It was a full waiver, designed to strip her of final decision power on a deal she architected. It didn't say she had done anything wrong. It didn't accuse her. It simply stated that, in light of recent public perception and internal dynamics, her continued influence over the merger might constitute a reputational risk to Halberd. She looked at the last page. If she refused to sign, the clause noted, she would be subject to a discretionary leave of absence, effective immediately. "This is retaliation," she said calmly, closing the folder. "And it's a cover-up. You're trying to erase the only voice that stood up to Richard's corruption in this process." Russ shook his head. "We're trying to de-escalate. This is bigger than one person." Amara leaned forward, voice razor-sharp. "Then maybe you should ask who funded that article. Because I didn't go to Yale on favors. I earned every step. And I have proof." Donna looked uncomfortable. "No one's accusing you directly, but you're holding my influence hostage," Amara finished. "You want me quiet and you want it clean." Neither of them responded. That was the answer. She stood, folder still in hand. "I won't be signing, but I suggest you both review Halberd's whistleblower policy before you move forward with this. Because by the end of this week, this entire game you're playing will no longer be confined to closed doors." She walked out. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the hallway. A new message from an unknown number. "He won't stop until you're erased. But there are eyes on this now." She knew the walls were closing in, but she also knew this was the moment she needed to stop surviving and start exposing. At 2:07 a.m., while parsing through backup drive data linked to internal project communications, she stumbled upon a compressed folder labeled Q4 Transition Internal VTC, with a date that matched a month-old executive call she had been excluded from. She'd never seen the file before, but it had been saved in a restricted archive folder under a server path accessible only to C-level staff. She decrypted it using a layered access script she had quietly developed months ago, protocol she never thought she'd need to use. The folder opened to a video file and a transcribed audio log. The file was shaky, clearly recorded without consent, most likely by a remote platform tool used during internal strategy sessions. She hit play. Richard's voice came through first, calm, assured, deliberate. If we secure the Avanta board vote, we can quietly move the cash reserves through the shell entities before next quarter's disclosures. Legal will catch up after the money's been cycled out. By the time they raise flags, we'll have leverage over both sides. A second voice responded. What about compliance? Avanta's legal is tighter than ours. Richard chuckled. They won't see it. We bury it under goodwill impairment. The merger optics will blind them. It's not illegal, it's just timing. Another voice laughed. You mean legal laundering? I mean strategy, Richard replied. We consolidate, we bleed the non-performing assets, then flip them in Q2. By the time we divest, we'll have moved the capital 3 times. The audio ran for 12 minutes. Each minute sharpened into something more damning than the last. This wasn't just a breach of ethics, it was criminal-level manipulation disguised as financial repositioning. And now Amara had it. The blueprint, the language, the names. She sat still for a long moment, staring at the frozen video frame of Richard mid-sentence, unaware that his legacy had just collapsed in real time. She copied the file to a portable encrypted drive and disconnected it. This was no longer just her fight, it was federal. At 7:43 a.m., a knock came at the glass door of the war room. It was Gregory Langston, one of Halberd's senior-most stakeholders and a quiet, long-term investor known for never showing his hand unless the stakes were absolute. He stepped inside without waiting for her approval. You found something, he said, voice low. Not a question, an acknowledgement. Amara studied him. Why are you here? Gregory Saturday, because I know what Richard did. And because you're not the only one who's tired of watching him burn this firm to the ground for personal gain. He reached into his jacket and produced a document, unsigned, sealed. That file you have, if it goes public, it will blow a crater through the merger. But it will also tank our stock, trigger an SEC probe, and destroy 2 decades of equity. Amara's gaze didn't flinch. So you're here to stop me? Gregory shook his head. I'm here to offer you a choice. I've waited years for someone to call Richard's bluff. You do this, and I'll back you. I'll shift my votes. I'll block his board renewal. But you have to understand, it will cost everything. The press will come for you first. The firm will close ranks. You'll be made into the scandal, not the savior. Amara exhaled, slow and even. I've already been made into a villain, Gregory. But I'd rather be a villain with the truth than a bystander with a title. He nodded once. Then we do it together. But you need to move before Friday. Because if that board vote happens, Richard consolidates control, and everything you have disappears into silence. He stood. I'll send you a number. Use it once. After that, I'm not on record. He left without another word. Amara stood alone, the encrypted drive in her hand. She didn't walk into Halberd's headquarters like an employee anymore. She walked in like an operator. Everything Richard had set in motion, the whisper campaigns, the character smears, the digital sabotage, had led to this. He had forced her hand, and now she would show him what she had kept hidden in her sleeve. At 9 a.m., Richard entered the boardroom with his usual bravado. His smile was wide, his posture arrogant, and in his hand was the press release for the Avanta merger, set to go live in exactly 42 minutes. Cameras had already been scheduled. Journalists were waiting in embargo rooms. Even the NASDAQ display was on standby to welcome the new entity. The deal was all but done, or so he thought. Amara arrived precisely 5 minutes later, carrying a slim leather folio and a sealed envelope bearing a gold insignia few in the room recognized immediately, until she placed it in the center of the boardroom table, directly in front of Richard, and spoke clearly. Before you finalize the announcement, she said, her tone firm but composed, you'll want to review this subpoena. Silence fell. Richard blinked, then smirked. What is this? A stunt. She opened the folio, revealing a notarized order issued by the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Division. This is an emergency federal injunction, she said, sliding the document toward him. Effective immediately, all asset transfers, structural realignments, and capital movements associated with the Halbert Avanta merger are frozen under Title 15 Securities Fraud Investigation Protocol. Around the table, the oxygen vanished. A few directors leaned forward, scanning the paper, eyes widening as the stamp came into focus. Richard laughed, the sound sharp and forced. "This is ridiculous. Where did you get this?" Amara looked him directly in the eyes. "From the team I've been embedded with for the last 14 months. His smile faltered. "What team?" "The Department of Justice," she said. "Specifically, the Economic Crimes and Market Integrity Task Force. I've been collaborating as a confidential partner since the first signs of irregular activity surfaced, before the merger was public." Richard stood, his chair scraping loudly. "You're bluffing." Amara turned to the board. "I have over 200 hours of recorded calls, email archives, and transaction logs, every manipulation, every shell transfer, every buried asset. I also have this." She tapped the encrypted drive on the table. A complete recording of Richard Grayson outlining, in detail, his plan to cycle company funds through offshore entities using the merger as a screen. Gasps followed. No one moved. No one spoke. One director leaned back, as if physically retreating from the fallout. Richard's voice raised again, desperate now. "This is outrageous. You've poisoned the company for your ego. You're nothing but a disgruntled employee. I'm a federal asset," Amara said, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "And this isn't about ego. It's about law." She turned to the head of legal, Donna, who had turned pale. "The order includes specific instructions. You are to deliver all executive communication from the last 6 quarters to the DOJ. Failure to comply is obstruction." Richard lunged toward the documents, but another voice stopped him. It came from Gregory Langston, who had remained silent until now. "She's not bluffing, Richard," Gregory said evenly. "I've seen the evidence. And if you try to obstruct, I'll ensure you face the full weight of fiduciary prosecution." Amara reached into her bag and withdrew a second envelope. "This is my formal notice of voting action. Effective immediately. Lewis Capital withdraws its investment position from Halbert's Q4 strategy, triggering a mandatory liquidation clause in the Avanta pre-merger agreement. The $180 million capital buffer you've been relying on just evaporated." Richard stared at her, his face drained of color. You'll crash the stock." "You already did," she replied. "I'm just forcing it into the light." And with that, she stood and walked out of the room. 37 minutes later, before the press conference could begin, the news hit the wire. Merger halted amid DOJ subpoena. Halbert stock in freefall. Within the first hour, Halbert equity lost $180 million in market value. News helicopters circled the building like vultures, and inside, the board fractured into factions, some clinging to what little control remained, others already drafting exit statements and resignation letters. But Amara, now operating from a secured legal suite in Midtown, wasn't finished. The DOJ's task force had only scratched the surface, and she had promised them more. Much more. That same afternoon, an encrypted message arrived on her secure channel. The sender ID was obscured, but the opening line struck like a match against gasoline. "I never wanted you in the crossfire. We have the same blood." Attached was a scanned birth certificate, 2 names, 1 father, 2 mothers. The woman who had sent it was no stranger. Her name was Elise Rowe, known inside Halbert as Vice Chair of Strategy, one of the most vocal critics of Amara's appointment 2 years earlier, and a board member who had once tried to block her promotion citing experience gaps. Amara sat still, letting the implication settle. Elise wasn't just a colleague. She was her half-sister. They had shared the same father, a corporate titan who had died years earlier and left behind a legacy steeped in both power and silence. Elise's mother had been the acknowledged wife, Amara's the second shadow, brilliant, invisible, and discarded. The message continued. "I kept the truth buried because I didn't want the name to carry me. I wanted to make it on my own, but I never meant for this to be a war between us. I was wrong. If you'll accept my help, I'll testify." Amara read the lines again. This revelation reframed everything. The woman who once blocked her had done it not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that acknowledging her would expose the secret they both carried. Elise had chosen survival. Amara had chosen justice. And now, finally, the paths converged. By 5 p.m., Elise had joined her in the Midtown suite, both seated across a DOJ analyst named Miller, who reviewed the evidence with visible discomfort. "What you've handed us," Miller said slowly, "includes not just internal fraud, but suspected links to outside contracting firms that have federal oversight. These are shell accounts moving between private sector deals and government grants. This isn't just corporate crime. It's national." Amara glanced at Elise, who nodded grimly. "Richard used Halberd as a laundering machine," Elise said. "He built a network of ghost subsidiaries and routed Avanta's goodwill funds through them. That's why he rushed the merger. He wasn't trying to grow the firm. He was trying to exit with clean books." Miller leaned forward. "Do you have any proof those accounts touched federal dollars?" Amara reached into her encrypted files and pulled up a line-item audit report Elise had quietly forwarded hours earlier. It showed wire transfers routed through a small consultancy that had received Department of Energy subcontracts in Q2. "That account," Amara said, pointing to a Cayman-based entity, "was originally used for green energy funds. Richard cycled capital through it and funneled it back to Halberd under disguised asset purchases. That's money laundering under federal classification." Miller exhaled. "We're not talking fines anymore. This is indictable." Amara nodded. "Then indict him." Over the next 12 hours, the DOJ expanded its case from corporate fraud to public corruption. A network of names surfaced: government liaisons, minor officials, and regulatory staff who had received consulting payments, routed through Halberd's asset division. Elise provided the internal emails. Amara provided the financial trails. Together, they burned the system from the inside out. By sunrise the next day, arrest warrants had been issued for 5 Halberd executives, 2 Avanta board members, and 1 high-ranking policy advisor in Washington. The news exploded. Headlines screamed across financial channels. Wall Street scandal spreads to Capitol Hill, Halberd implodes. But inside Amara, it wasn't triumph she felt. It was gravity. The kind of weight that comes from knowing you've pulled down an entire edifice, not for revenge, but because leaving it standing would have cost more lives, more truth, more time. News choppers hovered above the property, floodlights flared, and federal agents escorted him past the iron gates that once separated him from accountability. The charge sheet was longer than a quarterly earnings report: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities manipulation, obstruction of justice, misuse of federal contracts, and more. But what truly shocked the financial world wasn't the fall. It was who delivered the final push. That morning, during a high-security deposition filmed under federal oversight, the government called a key witness to testify against Richard. The door opened, and in walked Daniel Grayson, Richard's son, a junior shareholder, Ivy League graduate, and the last person anyone expected to speak against the empire his father built. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sat down, straightened his tie, and calmly read from a prepared statement detailing his knowledge of the shell firms, the doctor transfers, and the meeting where Richard allegedly said, "We own the game. The rules don't apply to us." The moment sent a shockwave through the firm. The Grayson dynasty didn't just implode, it fractured itself from within. Meanwhile, Amara watched the deposition from a private DOJ suite alongside Elise and 2 senior prosecutors. When Daniel finished, Elise looked over, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think he did it out of guilt?" Amara answered without looking away. "I think he did it because someone finally taught him what courage looks like." But Richard wasn't the only name on the list. As part of the DOJ's transparency mandate, a full internal review was ordered, and Halberd Equity was required to hold an emergency shareholder summit to publicly disclose the extent of its internal failures. Amara, now appointed interim compliance overseer by the Federal Board of Trustees, prepared the presentation herself. On Friday at 10 a.m., the live stream went live. Over 30,000 viewers, employees, investors, regulators, journalists, tuned in as Amara stepped onto the stage inside Halberd's own auditorium. She wore black. She spoke clearly, and she didn't hold back. Slide after slide, she revealed the internal emails that mocked her as a diversity placement, the Slack threads that circulated the meme calling her a mascot, the backroom discussions where her proposal was stripped of credit and reassigned to others. The room stayed silent. Then she pulled up the footage, grainy, time-stamped video from an internal IT feed. It showed Jeremy Voss, Richard's assistant, entering her office without authorization, using a master keycard, and plugging in an external drive to her machine. Another slide showed Lena Rowe's email exchange, where she agreed to streamline the narrative by presenting Amara's deck under her own name. And another showed the private message from HR requesting that Amara voluntarily withdraw for social optics. These, Amara said, pointing to the board behind her, were not isolated errors. They were a culture, and that culture stops today. No one applauded. No one needed to. The silence was its own verdict. Across the room, several executives sat pale-faced, their careers unraveling in real time. 2 resigned before the presentation ended. 1 fainted and had to be helped out by security. By noon, 12 terminations were announced. The stock halted. The public statement from the DOJ confirmed it. Halberd would undergo a full structural dismantling, with leadership transferred to an independent oversight panel until further notice. Amara stepped away from the podium, handed off the remote, and walked down the center aisle without once looking back. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Grayson. "Thank you for not letting him bury you." Or, "Me." She paused, typed one word, "You're welcome." The final days of Halberd Equity were quiet, not with denial, but with clarity. The name was stripped from the lobby wall, the logo removed from the glass doors, and the corporate website taken offline. No press releases, no spin, just the sound of something broken finally being disassembled piece by piece to make room for something new. In the months that followed, Amara led the restructure not from vengeance, but from vision. With DOJ oversight slowly transitioning to civilian control, she accepted the board's unanimous invitation to assume the role of acting CEO, not of Halberd, but of its rebirth. Under her guidance, the company rebranded as Phoenix Equity, a name chosen not for branding, but for meaning. It signified what had been burned, what had been purged, and what had been reborn from the ashes, not as a monument to power, but as a blueprint for integrity. The first hires she made were deliberate. She brought back the overlooked analysts, the assistants who had quietly protected her files, the interns who had seen the rot but lacked the voice to speak up. Lena Rowe, after resigning and issuing a private apology, returned, not as a partner, but as head of ethics and inclusion, a role she committed to with unflinching sincerity. Elise remained at Amara's side, no longer hiding her name or her story. And Daniel Grayson, disinherited by his father, but reborn by his own choice, became Phoenix's director of impact and transparency. The company was no longer led by the loudest voices. It was led by the clearest ones. Meanwhile, behind bars in a federal corrections facility in Pennsylvania, Richard Grayson had disappeared from headlines. He had declined interviews, refused attorneys' offers to pursue appeals. And then, one morning, Amara received a letter, handwritten, no return address, just 2 initials pressed into the wax seal. RG inside on unlined paper was a note in firm cursive script. Amara, for most of my life, I believed I was untouchable. That power protected me. That control meant I was right. But in the quiet hours, with the world no longer listening, I realized something that struck deeper than any headline or cell door. I thought I had built an empire, but I had only built a box filled with fear, shaped by pride, sealed by ignorance. You broke it, and I thank you. I hope someday the world forgives me. But if it doesn't, I'll understand. Richard. She read the letter twice, then folded it slowly and placed it inside a file labeled restitution. She didn't need validation, but acknowledgement in rare moments could feel like justice, too. 1 year later, Phoenix Equity stood on solid ground. Profitable, respected, audited quarterly by independent review. The company had launched a mentorship program for underrepresented voices in finance, a whistleblower fund for corporate accountability, and a new platform called Open Floor, where anyone at any level could anonymously flag cultural or ethical concerns to the executive board. Amara delivered her first annual address to a packed room of employees, many of whom had once been told they didn't belong. She spoke without slides, without fanfare, just her voice. "We are not here to rebuild what was," she said. "We are here to redefine what can be." The room erupted not in applause, but in something deeper, in trust, in belief, in the idea that maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't only a courtroom verdict. Maybe it was a culture. In the weeks that followed, a small book began circulating online. It wasn't published through a major house. It had no PR campaign, but it found its way to readers across the country. The title read, "Privilege is a Prison." The author was Richard Grayson. Inside, he chronicled his rise, his downfall, and the quiet unraveling of his own worldview from inside a cell. In the preface, he wrote, "This is not a redemption story. It's a confession. I do not ask to be celebrated. I only ask to be heard, if only to prove that change is possible, even here." Amara never publicly commented on the book, but when asked about it in an interview, she simply replied, "When the truth finally echoes, it reaches even those who tried hardest not to hear it." And with that, she moved on. Because the story wasn't about Richard anymore. It was about everyone who had been erased, silenced, rewritten, and now finally restored. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the betrayal, the takedown, or the final redemption? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment. We'd love to know.